That's what the topic is. What is MS Entra ID? In continuation to our SC 900 fundamentals series. So people who are expert who's been following this channel, they already know what it is. This is especially for the folks who are new and following this SC 900 series, right? So we'll start with the basics. We'll try to explain the concepts because that's what this uh, demands, this particular certification, right? So what is MS Entra ID? Well, let's put it this way. When you, because now you're going through SC900, so you must have seen the Azure portal. So what do? You open your laptop, okay, you sit there, you open portal.azure.com, right? There is an user ID and there is a password. You fill in your ID and password, and you were able to access the Azure portal, right? Or maybe you are using your phone or maybe a corporate device in the office. So what do? You may be accessing something called Teams, right? Excel or Word. Same goes with your office laptop. Maybe you are accessing some HR site or some Salesforce kind of thing, right? So when you access that particular link, there is a user ID and a password. Once you type in your ID and password, you get in, right? So if you're talking about Azure portal or this Teams, or we can say MS365, there is something which is managing your ID and password so that they can authenticate you. That something is MS Enter ID. So when you create your Azure account, you get your MS Enter ID. Let's suppose the same thing is attached with your MS365 account. So your MS Enter ID or tenant, you get tenant when you create your Azure account. You get tenant when you create your MS365 account, right? You get you do not get like separate tenants, but the same tenant. You can attach the same tenant to your Azure to MS365. Why? Because this is just an IAM system, or rather more than that. But just to understand, Microsoft cloud-based identity system. That's what it is. Who can sign in and access company resources both inside and outside the organization. Let's try to understand this. So let's suppose this is your organization or this is your subscription, right? Which has your Entra ID linked to your subscription. And inside your subscription, you have your resources. Okay, now who are accessing these resources? Well, these are accessed by the users who are present in your tenant, which is linked with your subscription. Okay, now only then it can verify if the user present in the tenant, right? And they need to access the resources here. So when the user log in, tenant will verify, and as per the permissions, it would be he or she will be able to access the Azure resources. These are Azure resources, right? And this is subscription. So these users are your internal users which are present in the tenant. Now what about your company needs help from a vendor, or there are some uh, guest users or users on private contract, those kind of things. Even they can access your Azure resources as a guest user. Okay, so what we do, there is a partner. Let's suppose there is a partner. This partner has users here, and these users need to access these resources. Okay, resources. But if they try to authenticate, they cannot get authenticated because this tenant doesn't have the information of this user and password. But there is a mechanism called B2B. There is a mechanism called business to business or B2B by which these users will become a guest in this tenant, and after authentication by their own IDP, they can access the resources that we have talked about in our previous videos. Now, this is all about MS Entra ID. You can have your applications registered to MS Entra ID, and relevant information is feed into the applications. Now, users can access that application, right? The users can access that application like a single sign on. Now, what if you want your customers to get authenticated through MS Entra? Not this one, but B2C. There is another thing called B2C. You create another tenant for those kind of scenarios. You are letting your customer log into to your applications. That is B2C. For that, there is a different tenant. We'll talk about all these in upcoming future. So the point is MS Entra ID is simply your identity and access management system in Microsoft cloud, a cloud-based system that help you manage who can sign in and access your company resources. It could be inside these resources and outside like these resources. Very simple, right? Now, the all the Azure resources, where are they? They are on the subscriptions. So you can give access through subscription on resources. It's a different RBAC, entire RBAC thing that we have already talked about in our previous videos. If those will be part of this SC, then we'll definitely cover that. All right, and same tenant can also work with the Microsoft 365, like your Outlook 10 SharePoint, because there are license involved. If you are working for an organization, they have to give access to these collaborative tools, and as per the license, you would have the access to those things, right? So why this Microsoft Entra ID is important? Well, the very first thing is this Entra ID tenant is disintegrated or not a part of a subscription, not a part of MS365. It is a separate identity based system. Once this is linked with your subscription or your MS365 account, all those users present in the tenant can be given access to MS365 or your Azure resources. So it will provide a single identity, right? Or SSO, and you can access so many applications, multiple applications with single ID and passwords. All the benefits with the SSO you can easily have, and no need to manage the platform because this is Microsoft provided. It is managed service for you, right? It can now. What if we have our on-premises, right? That could be a scenario. What if we have our on-prem environment where we have our system, IAM system like Windows AD already. So in that situation, what can be done? Well, no need to worry. There could be a proper sync could be established between your on-prem and your MS Enter ID. We call it AD sync, right? There are two ways to do that. We have already created a video on that also. If you see in the playlist, you'll find one, not in the SC, but in the previous one. Uh, but this is a fundamental foundation security compliance course, so this is more than enough to understand. If you have an existing identity system on your on premises, it could sync your identity into the MS Entra ID, or you could say Azure AD, which was the old name. It could exist alone in a cloud, it could exist in a hybrid, or it can exist both, right? Now, I also mentioned the devices. For example, if you have a mobile phone on through which you would like to access your uh, Teams or maybe Word or your Outlook, you can these can still be managed by the MS Entra ID. You deploy a simple MS compliance portal. If it is your local device, not the company managed, and they have some compliance like you should have some 6-digit password or your fingerprint or biometrics, or you should keep on changing that after 30 days. There are few compliances. Once those are met, only then you can access the company applications like your MS365 applications. Apart from this, it has inbuilt security features like your identity score or auditing or sign-in logs, a lot more. Along with that, it provides you like MFA, identity protection, conditional access. There's so many things which is provided by the Entra ID. That's the reason I was saying it's not just a simple IAM, but it's more than that, right? So there are few terms that we should be aware of. The very first thing is tenant. People get confused. Tenant is like we have a landlord and we are the tenant. Similarly, in Microsoft, whenever we create account, we become their tenant. And once we become their tenant, we will get a directory. So it could be, well, we use these things interchangeably, like there is a MS Entra tenant. But just to understand, once we log into Microsoft, we get MS Entra tenant, a tenant ID. Inside tenant, you could say there is a directory. You cannot move it outside the tenant. You could say simply a folder where you can have your resources like your user, your applications, and things like that, devices and all. So that could be your directory, just for the reference. So in case you get confused, because even if you see on the subscription at the top, when you go to the Azure portal subscription top, you can change the directory. What are actually we doing? We are just moving where on the subscription. This is the subscription. If we can change this subscription to not be linked with this tenant anymore, linked with this tenant. So what are we missing? All the users and all those permission will be missed or will not be there. We need to give new permissions as per the new directory, right? So tenant, we understand that there's a dedicated space in Microsoft's Entra and holds your users, groups, and app settings. And there is a unique name. What kind of name it is? You have already seen many times. It would be like your company dot on microsoft.com. There would be tenant, and there would be a huge number like a subscription ID as well along with this, which is your tenant ID. Now, if I need to explain directly, it could be like a database of your users and resources. Technically, the same as the tenant. You cannot remove these things, and we can use interchangeably. Just to understand, I'm just saying tenant and then the directory. Think of it as like a tenant is the container, and the directory is what's inside it, right? And we may have So now, the understanding is if we have an organization, we are opting for a subscription Azure or MS365, we are getting tenant. So we will have a single tenant, right? That's a pretty good understanding. But we may have a situation where we have multi-tenant organization. Usually, we prefer to have a single tenant so they're easy to manage and less admin overhead. However, there are situations like there is a company with multiple subsidiaries, there are mergers, acquisitions, different regions need to keep user data isolated. A global company has a separate tenant for the US, Europe, and Asia to for maybe regulatory compliance. So the idea is if you see a multi-tenant organization, do not think it's not possible and do not panic. It is pretty much possible. organization can have multiple tenant. Ideally, prefer to have single, but there could be multiple reasons behind it. Now, if you talk about who will use this tenant, who uses this tenant, so it would be like not your customers, of course, but your IT admins, the one who is managing your Azure, not your developers. They are just accessing the resources, but and their ID and password given permission by your admins, your IT admins, or your cloud engineers or cloud admins. They use this Entra ID or your to give access, provide RBAC, enforce MFA, conditional access, monitoring things, and of course the auditors and those people, right? So this is what the Microsoft Entra ID is. It's more than just a login system. It's the foundation of identity security in the Microsoft ecosystem, powering seamless access, collaboration, and protection across hybrid environment. And this is a wonderful feature to utilize for zero trust. If you remember the principles, they are all about identity security, and MS Entra gives you a lot more than that. So, with this simple topic, conceptual topic, what is Entra IT, I hope it is clear, and now people can understand, people who are watching, of course, how exactly it works, what it is. Well, we'll go deeper in this particular series and upcoming SC 300 as well. Till then, I hope it was helpful. Thank you and take care.